Hello everyone and welcome back to the office. We are in, believe it or not, the third to last week before school ends for the summer. So we are now in week 6, and as we move out of week 5, you'll notice that we start to shift the focus of discussion from the idea of rhetoric leading to truth, or rhetoric being bad and useless, or rhetoric meaning nothing but the style and delivery, into a heavy focus on the role language plays in rhetorical criticism and in rhetoric, generally speaking. And the way that we do that is that when we move away from sort of the psychosocial interest of language and rhetoric, as we saw with Vico and Bacon, we move towards a very, very specific focus on language with John Locke. So we are moving through the Enlightenment, modernism, and so we've got those two sort of feeding into each other. And as we move through this Enlightenment and this modernism, this modern period, we're going to move into the contemporary pretty quickly, starting on Thursday in the second half of this week. So for today, we're still on modernism. We're still on that idea that everything is coming to be known through human experience. So there's the humanistic sort of influence, and able to be known through the exploration of ideas through rhetoric, which is sort of that scientific. And then also, however, understanding the beauty and artistic side of rhetoric. So we know that's where we're coming from most immediately. The question is, where are we headed? And the answer to that question is very difficult. We're headed into an era when rhetoric means a million things, and where we try to come up with some form of understanding rhetoric and its impacts. So let's start with John Locke, because John Locke, who was in fact a social theorist before he was really a linguistic theorist, I don't know how many people would really call him a linguistic theorist so much as he did like to philosophize about language. And the reason why he did that was because, if you know anything about John Locke, which you may or may not, I don't know, for those of you who have studied him, then you know that in political science they study him for particularly the social contract, that this sort of invisible and intangible and unspoken agreement that we all have to obey certain rules and regulations, particularly the law. This understanding that we are not going to violate things like killing each other or stealing from each other. Those things are just inherently wrong, and that what the law sets up, we will agree to, sets up right and wrong. So this social contract that we have is a political and philosophical and social theory more than it is anything else. Locke has even more to say about it, because some people don't know this, but John Locke helped write the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta was sort of the prerequisite document for our Constitution. So Locke heavily influenced our Constitution as we know it, as it was written in 1780, whatever it was written in. I know it was ratified in 1787, so in that era, right? And so a lot of that was borrowed from the Magna Carta, and a lot of what John Locke said worked its way into our Constitution, which, by the way, leads us with some social contract. And I don't know why, but for the first time in teaching this class since 2006, all of a sudden, this stuff has become completely relevant, because if you are watching or following anything with the recent Supreme Court decision, you know that the first thing that was violated when they decided to go ahead and radically change the powers of the commander-in-chief, the president, is they violated the social contract. Our understanding of what the president is supposed to do, as we've known it for 250 years, has suddenly shifted and changed. I can't be more thrilled in the sense that I'm finally relevant. However, I'm not thrilled that this is the way that rhetoric becomes relevant. And here's why. Because the way that people are talking about the Supreme Court decision, the way that we're talking about changes to the constitutional and commander-in-chief powers specifically, and the way that we're talking about how this will impact our ability to choose our future leaders, makes me incredibly uncomfortable. But that is the job of rhetoricians, is to explain the government to the people. And when I watch this happen, as I'm sure you can now too, as you start to watch it more critically, you start to realize, wait a minute, I don't think that person has that right. Or that sounds like a lie. Or that seems like the truth coming from a credible source of information. And, you know, I certainly encourage people to watch all kinds of media, to read all kinds of media. Any medium you could get your hands on, read it, learn about it, because it's our job as rhetorical critics and rhetoric scholars. It's our job to be able to sort out what is most probably true. Remember, that is our job. So whenever I'm watching stuff on TV, my husband leaves the room because he's just like, I can't watch with you because you'll drive me nuts. And that's understandable. I tend to watch the news by myself. Now, why is it, or how is it, that we fail in our communication of explaining these things to the general public? What gets lost? We already know how our scientific understanding gets lost and how it's problematic, because we think we're certain in some ways, and also because, as Bacon tells us, we're limited, right? Well, there's something else that is limited, and this goes to John Locke. So let's look at him. John Locke says essentially that there are 4 problems with language. The first is that one word can mean many, many things. The second is that many words can have the same meaning. The third is that there's no natural relationship between an object and its name. So there's no natural relationship between, I don't know, light and the word light, or flower and a physical flower. There's no natural relationship. That's all assigned meaning, and that becomes really important later. And then finally, the fourth, language cannot encapsulate the complexity of what is being described or intended with words. And there are several ways that can be probably pretty evident to you. That some people have talked about, you know, if you put someone in a room and you tell them that there is an object in the room that is that they need to figure out just by sensing it, that they will say, for example, that they blindfold themselves, they will perceive it very differently than if I were to sit down and describe it to them, right? Additionally, if you have not experienced something, your interpretation of it is very different if you just hear the word. The biggest example I can use is elephant. And I mean that literally. That's probably the biggest one I can think of. Whenever I say the word elephant, I smell elephants. I can feel their skin. I can feel what their snout is like on my shoulder. I can hear them, and I can see their big floppy ears, which I've felt. Now, I've experienced an elephant. If you have not experienced an elephant, then you won't have any of that. You'll just have sort of a flat, two-dimensional idea. Elephant, it means this animal, right? Like we sort of get the definition of it rather than the experience. And if you have experienced an elephant, you may have experienced it very differently than I did. And so you might have a different relationship to that word elephant. Therefore, the word elephant cannot completely encapsulate all of the complexities of what an elephant is. I hope that helps. Now, all 4 of those are problems with language itself. He also says, however, that there's a problem with human communication, right? And that problem is that the language that we use, as I've just demonstrated, means something different internally, sort of like to us, than it does in the civil context. So talking to someone else or talking to a large group. As I just demonstrated with the word elephant, it can mean very different things to me and very different things to you, and vice versa. And so that means that there's two really different kinds of language. And those two different kinds of language are problematic enough. And then you add on that our interpretation of language is flawed for those two reasons, but that language itself is flawed for the four reasons that I listed before. One of the ways that he talks about the problems with language is through two types of definitions that you were probably taught at some point in your life, and you probably weren't taught the whole thing. Now, you were not taught incorrectly, but we don't really delve deep into this idea until much later in your life, like now. And those two kinds of definitions are connotative and denotative. A lot of people say, oh, well, the denotative definition of something is the dictionary definition, and the connotative definition is contextual definition, right? Because that's what makes sense. It doesn't exactly only stop there, however. What do we mean by the dictionary definition of something? Well, what is a dictionary? It's a list of words and definitions that we have agreed on. So in the social sort of creation of our language, we agree that these words mean these things. And we try to list every different version of the word that we can. If you've ever looked up a word, you see a lot of notations there that you might not have any idea what they mean, but they all mean something. How it's used as a noun, how it's used as a verb, how it's used in the past tense, the present tense, the future tense, all of that stuff is included in the dictionary. I remember when I was a kid, my grandmother was a 4th grade teacher, and she would walk around going, ain't in a word, and I ain't going to say it because ain't in the dictionary, okay? And that's no longer true. That word now is in the dictionary. The word bling used to mean something very, very different from what it means now, and that new word is in the dictionary. We now agree that these definitions have changed over time and that they might mean something different than they did when my grandmother was alive, which, inherently makes sense. So what is a denotative definition then? It is the agreed upon meaning of words. And Mr. Webster or whoever got together and they put them together and they said, here's a collection of meanings that we all agree on, and they called it a dictionary, and that was that. Connotative is a little bit more than just sort of the context of the word itself. It's really all of the ways that the context of the word works for individual people who are interpreting the word, and for individual people who are using the word. So in what ways does that differ? And the answer is that it differs from person to person. And like I said with the word elephant, you might have a different relationship to the word elephant than I do. I also think of cute little plush animals because I used to have little plush elephants for some reason. I don't know why. That was a long time ago. So the word elephant in of itself can be very confusing, just using that word. However, if I bring an elephant in, am I then demonstrating what the definition of elephant is? Well, partially. So what am I doing to the language to change it? Well, again, there's two things that we can do when it comes to language. If we want people to get the meaning of what we're saying, we use more what we call concrete language. Concrete language is that language that makes us understand things in a, quote, concrete manner, or in a realistic or material manner. So bringing an elephant in here, pointing to the elephant and saying that's an elephant, is certainly making it more concrete what I mean. Even showing you a picture of an elephant is more concrete meaning, right? In its opposition is an abstract language, right? Abstract words. One of my favorite lines comes out of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which may have ended by the time you guys were born. I don't even know anymore. I'm not keeping track. But it's an old show, but it was very witty. And one of the things that Buffy says a lot is, can you vague that up for me a little bit? Which is normally said in a sarcastic tone when somebody's being incredibly abstract and vague and she doesn't quite understand what they're trying to say. And in that context, people may try to be particularly abstract or vague. When we give people bad news, a lot of times we're abstract and vague. So, with all those problems with language, with all those problems internally for us and externally in the definitions and the sort of meanings that are different, and the 4 problems with language, how do we get around it? John Locke says there is only one thing that needs to be done, and that one thing that needs to be done is purification. We need to have a very purified language. So the language that we agree upon in the dictionary should be the language that we use to resolve some of these problems that language has and that we have as interpreters of meaning. So that sums up John Locke for you. Those 4 problems with language, the 2 types of language, the connotative and denotative meanings, and concrete and abstract language. All of that comes down to John Locke saying we should purify language. So how do we solve all of those problems? We purify. Purify generally means stripping it down to its most basic idea, but in this case I think that it means sticking strictly to the agreed upon definitions of words and keeping them in that context always. Now that sounds boring. That's because it is. But we're going to see it get back again later on, actually Thursday. Because we're going to continue talking about language and how it impacts the rhetorical nature of our speaking and our writing. All right? So when you read for Thursday, you're going to hit I.A. Richards, and I don't remember who the second one is, and I don't have my glasses on, so you know I can't see it very well. And Stephen Toulmin. And we are heading directly into the contemporary here because Stephen Toulmin just died actually, I say just died. He probably died before you were born. He died probably in 2008, maybe. Probably not before you were born, but a good while ago. Okay, but Stephen Toulmin was alive for the majority of my career, so I see him more as a contemporary, and more importantly, you've probably heard the name Stephen Toulmin in any study of argument. Now, why do we put I.A. Richards and Stephen Toulmin on the same day? I.A. Richards deals specifically with language and I.A. Richards, deals strictly with language, and Stephen Toulmin is dealing with the structure of argument. Kind of feels like style and language and delivery versus, invention, particularly an arrangement. And you would be right to think that. Well, what do we mean by modern? What do we mean by the modern movement? Modernists believe that everything in our world should be functional. Okay, so if you have a couch, it doesn't matter if it's pretty or not. It just matters that you can use it for the function it's intended. Both I.A. Richards and Stephen Toulmin provide us with very strict models of how language behaves or how argument behaves. Okay? They give us these models that we could kind of plug our ideas into and pull them out on the other side, and they will be something different. And that's what we're going to be talking about. Modernism is the idea of clean, straight lines, of functionality over form, of meaning over style and so on. Content over style for sure. And so that's what we're going to start to look at on Thursday. In the meantime, I hope you had a very good 4th of July. I hope that you have all the information that you need. Your paper is due on the last day of this class. So you still have 3 weeks to finish that paper, to do that paper if you haven't started it yet. If you have any questions about it, please let me know. I don't think I've received any. So if you sent an email and I haven't responded, I sat here all day today and responded to emails. I didn't have that many, and they were from students. So I'm kind of a little bit worried, and I'm hoping that you guys are getting all the direction that you need. Please remember that the grading scheme, also known as the rubric, is up for you. If you want to get an A on this paper, I'm more than happy to give everybody an A, which leads to the last thing I'm going to talk about, which is your first papers. You might be sitting there going, we need those back, and I agree, you do. I just haven't finished them completely yet, which means that I haven't released, or as Brightspace calls it, published all of the grades just yet. So I'm not going to make any promises on that, as I did not last week. I was kind of hoping to get more done this week than I did. So, as you know, based on my last video to you guys. So anyway, we will be in touch soon, and if you have any questions, please email me, text me, call me, whatever you want to do, and we will figure it out. If you need to schedule a Zoom meeting with me, feel free to do that as well. If you need to meet me in person and you're around the Springfield, Nixa area, let me know and we will find a place and a time to meet. Okay, everybody, I will talk to you in a couple days. Happy reading.